Doug is a retired automotive engineer, serving last as manager of motorsports engineering for Honeywell Turbo Technologies, developing custom gear turbochargers for worldwide motor racing, including Indy, Le Mans, World Rally, and others. He is a Vietnam veteran, serving in 1970 as a sergeant in the U.S. Army 4th Infantry Division as a reconnaissance squad leader. He is the recipient of the Bronze Star Medal, the Purple Heart, the Air Medal, and the Vietnam Gallantry Cross. 45 years after his discharge, Doug authored his book, Testimony of the Protector, which is his personal testimony of his struggles coping with the visceral realities of Vietnam combat without having come to faith, and how he was supernaturally protected through all danger to be later pursued and then saved in a miraculous fashion, a lightning bolt experience. He is a 4-time national go-kart champion in the 1970s. Today, Doug serves as a volunteer to the Freedom Committee of Orange County, helping other veterans scan their photographs and make PowerPoint presentations for use in school classrooms to educate students about the cost of freedom as a part of the Orange County Living History Program. With that, I'd like to introduce Doug Milliken, one of our teachers.
Well, welcome to the encore presentation of The Faces of Freedom. That's the name of my speech. The reason I call it an encore presentation is because I originally wrote this speech for delivery on Veterans Day at the El Toro Memorial Park in Lake Forest. And at the end of delivering that speech, Jim and Uni Fosdick came up to me and said, gee, that would really work well at our May meeting at the SAR, so that's how I ended up here. So I'm sorry, Jim and Uni, you've heard this, but
that's okay.
In spite of the fact that I spent less than 2 years on military active duty, see if it works better with I should have brought my computer glass. I believe that it's a defensible position for me to claim that there's never been a time in my entire life when I have not been affected by the United States military. The day I was born, when the doctor held me up by my ankles and spanked me to jumpstart my first breath, I found myself within the confines of Walter Reed Army Hospital in the nation's capital. My father, who worked then at the Pentagon, was Colonel Charles Burnham Milliken, West Point class of 1936. He had been the head of finance, reporting directly to General George Patton during the Second World War. In my father's graduating class were William Westmoreland and Creighton Abrams, 2 leaders that would go on to command U.S. forces for the duration of the Vietnam War. Growing up as an Army brat, I attended 10 different schools from 1st through 12th grades. I lived and went to schools both on and off Army bases, and was often subject to base regulations. Today, I'm connected to the military by post-traumatic stress disorder and other service-connected ailments, and those will undoubtedly be with me until the end. And then I'll be buried at Arlington National Cemetery next to my father, a military man cradle to grave, though I served only 21 months on active duty. My own service in the U.S. Army began one afternoon in October of 1968, when I came home from a day in the classrooms of California State University at Los Angeles and found a letter from Uncle Sam in the mail. Greetings, I was drafted. I was required by law to surrender my individual freedoms temporarily to the authority of the United States Army in their effort to secure the individual freedoms of a foreign ally, the South Vietnamese. When the Army reached out and touched me in 1968, it was the touch of a very familiar finger. In 1968, I was caught up in the bump of an additional 48,000 draftees beyond the regular schedule to replace the 16,000 Americans killed and 87,000 wounded earlier in the year due to the Tet Offensive and surrounding actions. After basic training and advanced individual training as an infantryman, rather than being deployed directly to Vietnam as a private first class with the rest of my graduating class, I was selected to attend Non-Commissioned Officers Candidate School in Fort Benning, Georgia, a program designed to overcome another shortage, the shortage of trained, qualified, non-commissioned officers to serve as infantry squad leaders in Vietnam. The concept was similar to that of OCS, Officers Candidate School, except OCS required a 3-year commitment and you came out a second lieutenant, and NCO Candidate School fit within the 2-year commitment and you came out an E5 buck sergeant. After 5 months of training in leadership and tactics at Fort Benning, I was deployed to Vietnam and assigned to a reconnaissance platoon in the 4th Infantry Division in the Central Highlands of South Vietnam, where we conducted reconnaissance throughout the region. Who here remembers the Kent State Massacre? At this age group, it should be almost every day. 4 students were killed and 9 were wounded by the Ohio National Guard at an anti-war rally at Kent State University. That protest was against the Cambodia incursion of May 1970. The northern thrust of that incursion, called Operation Ben Tay 1, was the largest helicopter combat assault by U.S. forces of the Vietnam War. 6 battalions delivered in a single assault on a North Vietnamese Army base area on the Ho Chi Minh Trail network in the northeast tip of Cambodia, near the tri-border area with Laos. I rode on one of nearly 500 helicopters sorties of infantry. After 21 months of military service and 8.5 months in combat, I was discharged for medical reasons. For the next 40 years, I tried my best to forget about my Vietnam experience, and I was fairly successful at that. As a diversion, I focused on getting my mechanical engineering degree, on raising a family, and on my career. I didn't belong to any veterans organizations or wear any clothing that identified me as a veteran or attend any parades. Most of my acquaintances had no reason to believe I had ever been in the military. After 40 years of avoidance, I began to reflect upon my past. That started when I read a book published in 2010. It was about Operation Ben Tay 1, in which I had participated. I had known very little about the overall operation. I only knew what I saw with my own eyes and heard with my own ears and over the radio listening to chatter. This book was called 12 Days in May by Gerald Berry and was filled with personal accounts from soldiers from all 6 participating battalions, and it gave form to my personal experience. In 2013, I started writing my own book to tell my military testimony, framing it within the historical context learned from Gerald Berry's book, 12 Days in May, and how the military experience later affected my Christian testimony. Researching to get my facts straight drug me back through my experiences, and it was difficult to relive certain parts of my own story. Before writing my book titled Testimony of the Protected, I read a number of other books by veterans, mostly choosing those who served at the same time or place that I did. During that process, I began to wonder if any enemy soldiers that I fought against had written their personal accounts and that had been translated into English. My search turned up 2 of them. In the epilogue of my book, I wrote about the writings of a North Vietnamese Army enlisted man named Nguyen Van Thuan and a Viet Cong officer named Truong Nhu Tang. I was curious about their perspectives on the war and how victory had affected their lives going forward. I was surprised to hear them both refer to themselves as freedom fighters. That was confusing to me. If I was a freedom fighter, how could my opponent also be a freedom fighter? Who was right? Who was the one truly fighting for freedom, And who was the one fighting for bondage? If they were really fighting for freedom, there would have been no reason for the United States to get involved in the Vietnam War. We must have different definitions of the word freedom. Since 2013, I've had this question in the back of my mind. This caused me to go deeper into the meaning of the word freedom in its various contexts. I concluded that the reason for the confusion is that freedom has many faces. There are many societies that live in states of partial freedom. Arthur Charles Kingsley said, there are two freedoms. The false, where a man is free to do what he likes, and the true, where a man is free to do what he ought. True freedom requires a passion for doing the right thing. Otherwise, it just leads to mayhem. Corrupt societies lacking in moral fiber can never achieve the true brand of freedom. Even the false brand eludes them. And a once just society that erodes toward moral bankruptcy also will see their hard-won freedoms eroded. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong freedom fighters were obviously not thinking about individual freedoms like I was. Rather, repeating their government's propaganda, which referred to their government's freedom from foreign influence. What they call freedom, I call independence. Independence is possible without freedom. My country fought a war for independence from the British Empire, so I could understand their sentiment. But after our independence was established, we still had to define and protect individual freedoms through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. My communist adversaries never had such protections, so their freedom is really just independence for their government, not protected freedoms for their people. When I call myself a freedom fighter, I take government's independence from foreign oppressors as a given, and I'm talking about fighting for individual freedoms and for protections. I'm talking about freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of movement, freedom from undue searches and seizures, the right to privacy, and other rights such as the right to bear arms, the right to vote, the right to an access to educational opportunity, and the right to access to economic opportunity. Freedom is all of the above for every citizen and much more. Today, as we approach Memorial Day, I want to have a conversation about freedom. Not just about independence or the first image that comes to your mind when that word is mentioned, but about all the other connotations and subsets of that word, and what it means to be a freedom fighter for true comprehensive freedom. Freedom is a complex concept. Even we Americans are not totally free to do as we like. We're free within certain societal constraints, laws and ordinances. We can't drive down the 91 freeway out here at 120 miles an hour if we want to. And we can't smoke after a meal in a restaurant because we enjoy it. And who here today has ever received a draft notice from the Selective Service System in the mail? Didn't that mean we had to surrender our individual freedoms for a period to protect the freedoms of our fellow citizens and often to fight for the freedom of foreign allies who we do not even know personally? One way to appreciate freedom is to study the lives of individuals who live their entire lives, generation after generation, in oppressive societies, totalitarian dictatorships, and theocracies. This is the reality in Vietnam today, where many self-proclaimed freedom fighters still live as veterans of war. My identity with military life really started centuries before I was born. When God knit me in my mother's womb, it was with the genetics of dozens of ancestor warriors who left a legacy of survival and victory for me to extend. These military genes go back much farther than America. Since my retirement, I have conducted genealogical research into my ancestry And I found that freedom may have looked different to my ancestors who called themselves freedom fighters. The ones born before our nation did not enjoy constitutional protections or know anything of the Bill of Rights. My 8th great-grandfather, Lieutenant Thomas Burnham, was a Puritan who settled in Ipswich, Massachusetts, and fought in the Pequot Indian War on the side of the Narragansett and Mohican Indians against the Pequot tribe. Freedom meant economic opportunity in a fur trade war to him. What did freedom mean to my 5th great-grandfather, Alexander Milliken Sr.? That's the father of my patriot ancestor that I'm registered with. He was the only one of 4 brothers to survive the siege of Londonderry, Ireland in 1689. For Alexander Sr., a Protestant, it was freedom of religion, freedom from religious prosecution by King James II, a defender of Catholicism who attacked his city. What did freedom mean to Alexander's son, Alexander Milliken Jr.? He immigrated to New Hampshire in the colonies and fought in the French and Indian War. For Alexander Jr., freedom meant supporting British interests to secure freedom from French rule of the colonies, a power struggle. So we fought with the English before we fought against them. He fought against the English, his son fought. Again, he fought for him, his sons fought against him. What did freedom mean to Alexander Jr.'s son, Robert Milliken, my patriot ancestor, the first in my paternal line to be born in America? For Robert, a revolutionary patriot and a private in the Rhode Island militia, freedom meant independence for the colonies from the King of England. Likewise, for 2 other patriot ancestors, my 4th great-grandfathers, Private David Burnham and Captain Daniel Lane, who was taken prisoner in the Burgoyne campaign in 1777. For my great-grandfather, Francis Almond Burnham, who served in the Rhode Island Cavalry in the Civil War, freedom involved the issue of states' rights and defending the claim that all men are created equal against Southern slave owners. For my grandfather, Edward Josiah Macadam, who served in the 122nd Engineers in France in World War I, freedom meant protection of American citizens from German provocation to draw us into a largely European war. To my father, Colonel Charles Burnham Milliken, in World War II, freedom meant protection from German and Japanese attempts at world domination. And to myself, freedom was not for ourselves, but for our ally, the Republic of South Vietnam, against communist aggression from Ho Chi Minh in North Vietnam, and his backers, Chairman Mao in China and Leonid Brezhnev in Russia. The Vietnam War seems a little messier than the others. Today, there are a variety of opinions about the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, ranging from a mistake to a misfortune to a disaster. Many of these opinions are held by people focused only on the unsatisfactory result, like Monday morning quarterbacks pointing fingers. Many think the Vietnam War was just between the United States and the North Vietnamese. Not true. One must comprehend the entire history to draw an informed conclusion. Many have forgotten or never knew that the United States signed the Manila Pact in 1954, creating the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO, modeled after the European NATO. Credit to Ham and Sally for pointing that out to me. It was signed also by the nations of Australia, France, New Zealand, Pakistan, Philippines, Thailand, and the United Kingdom. This agreement was to pledge combined efforts to resist threats of forcible communist takeovers in Southeast Asia by Chinese, North Vietnamese, or other forces. When the threat turned physical in the case of the communist North Vietnam, backed by China and Russia, the United States initially responded by respecting this agreement, committing significant resources along with our allies Australia, South Korea, South Vietnam, Thailand, New Zealand, and the Philippines. But we later changed our minds when the cost exceeded expectations. Given the result, was it a mistake to have signed the Manila Pact to oppose communist aggression against our friends. When I'm asked my opinion of the dissatisfying result of the Vietnam War, I can only say that if it was a good idea to quit, then it was a very bad idea to get involved in the first place. And if it was a good idea to get involved in the first place, then it was a very bad idea to quit. You pick one. I know there are many people born in Vietnam who live free lives today in America as American citizens here in Southern California and other places who are glad someone fought for a while for the freedom they enjoy today. But a very heavy price was paid for their freedom. Millions of South Vietnamese citizens who supported the fight for their own freedom in Vietnam lost it. This month we honor our veterans killed while defending us, our freedom fighters who paid the ultimate price, and our nation thanks each and every one of them from the bottom of our hearts. Today's a good time to reflect on what freedom meant to our forefathers, what it means to us, and what it will mean to our grandkids and descendants. I'm concerned for the freedom of my grandchildren. Who will be there to protect their freedom when I sit at the parking lot of my grandson's school and hear the final bell ring and all the students start to pour out of the front gate? I look at that body of youth and I wonder, which of these school children are our future veterans? Which ones of them will become intimate with PTSD on behalf of the others? Which of them will not survive? Unfortunately, protecting our freedom makes it necessary to fight those who would deny us. It would be nice to be able to be a pacifist, but someone must be willing to protect the pacifist from those who would plot to seize his or her freedom. And so that is what we do. We fight for the beloved freedom so we can pass it on to our children and to our grandchildren. Never forget that challengers to our freedom can come from within. There have always been those evil forces in leadership that want to establish tyranny and to dictate. Be vigilant, my friends. I belong to an organization called the Freedom Committee of Orange County, and the objective of this group of veterans is to take our stories of our living history into the classrooms of Orange County schools to educate students about the sacrifices that have been made to obtain and protect their freedom as students in Orange County. The founder of our group, Pearl Harbor survivor Jack Hammett, used to say to the students at the conclusion of his time with them, "I'm in my 90s and I won't be around much longer. Please won't you take care of my country?" Jack is no longer with us, but the rest of those in this group are keeping Jack's message alive. My trips into Orange County classrooms often involve a Q&A session. The students ask lots of very good questions. Many are ones I'm hearing for the very first time. If a student asks me for my advice, I suggest they make 3 lists. The first list is your personal list of what you stand for. What is most important to you above all else? This is your list, and nobody can tell you what belongs on your list because you're free. Make that first list now. Upon graduation from high school, make a second list, which is your list of those items from your first list that are worth fighting for, worth your personal sacrifice. This list represents what you are dedicated to. And the third list is your list of those items from the second list that are worth dying for. Know that someday you might be called on to put your life on the line to protect our freedoms. If I could be called, you could be called. Review and revise these 3 lists at least once every 5 years for the rest of your life so that you will always know what you stand for and what's worth dying for. When you're old and retired like me, those early lists will be a source of great amusement. I've donated some of my books to the chapter. They're at the back near the door. It's my story of my personal struggle with Vietnam combat without having come to faith, and how I was supernaturally protected. and later pursued and saved in a miraculous salvation event. Mine was one of those lightning bolt experiences. The books are available for any size contribution, or if you don't have any money, just take a book, and the money I'll turn over to the treasurer at the end of this meeting. So are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Sal.
Not a question, but didn't your book win an award?
Actually won 3 of them. It won. It was a finalist in the Indie Book Awards, and it was a finalist in the Reader's Favorite International Book Awards. And then just recently, the Military Writers Society gave it a bronze medal.
Outstanding.
Certificate for you. Appreciation. Thank you, Doug,
Okay.
for speaking today.
You're welcome.
All you've done to serve our country.
It was pretty tough because the book was in between my 2 lenses. I was really struggling to read it,
Yeah.
and I should have brought my computer glasses. It would have been a lot smoother.